Hello and welcome to the Modern Software Engineering channel. Today we're doing another One Big Question. I'm Trisha G. I will be hosting this One Big Question and I will be talking to Emily.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily Bache. I'm also one of the presenters on this channel and I'm a technical coach.
So the idea about the One Big Question format is that we are going to take one question and we are going to explore it together and maybe come to some conclusions or maybe not. And the reason I think where I wanted to talk to Emily about this topic, which I'll introduce in a minute in particular, is because I think both of us feel quite passionately about it. And the question is, can you measure the value of refactoring? Now, I like the idea of refactoring because I love tooling and I love automation. And as Emily mentioned, Emily does coaching. So she comes across a whole bunch of people who need help with refactoring, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, can you measure the value of refactoring? What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, wow, yeah. Well, the thing is, I have this very much a belief that refactoring is a valuable activity for many teams. But the whole measurement thing is a bit fraught, actually. How do you measure things in software development generally is just, that's hard. So maybe we could talk about the value of refactoring a bit and then come back to how you measure it.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think that there's a temptation for developers like me to see that the value is inherent in just doing the refactoring is its own value. You know, it's so much fun and it's pleasing, but it has other value, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. Refactoring really is fun, especially when you get good at it. I think actually, with most skills, when you get good at them, they start being fun. And it's a skill that you acquire, and it's if you're good at refactoring, then you can take a design that's kind of like rough around the edges and make it a good quality code, easier to read, easier to understand, and simpler in some way. That's usually the goal is usually increase the simplicity or manage the complexity at least in a better way.
I think that's what I like about refactoring, because I've worked on a lot of legacy code bases. I've worked in a lot of places where, you inherit this code. It is what it is. And it's kind of fun to take something which is by definition more complex because it's been around for a long time and it has a lot of features, and try and get exactly the same functionality with fewer lines of code or clearer intent or something like that.
Absolutely. So that's really the value in the refactoring, is to get to a code base which is better to manage, and it's more fun to work with afterwards as well. You can add those features more easily because you can see where to put them. And it's not just I think some people kind of like say, well, there's no such thing as bad code. It's just code that I didn't write. Because there's definitely, you're always biased towards code that you did write because you understand it better. But when you've been refactoring some code, it can become like you wrote it. It's and you understand it better and you can build features on it. But also the real test is whether you did it well, is whether the next person who comes to that code can also develop features more easily. And that's the kind of the test. Did you make it simpler?
I saw your video from the channel this week, and you mentioned a study, which I hope we'll put the link to in the description below, a study which says if you have better code quality, you have fewer bugs, it's faster to fix bugs, and you get more reliable predictions on making those sorts of changes. So increasing code quality makes it easier to maintain that code. My working theory is that when you refactor towards that better code quality.
Right. Well, that really, that's the whole point. The definition of refactoring is improving the design of existing code without changing the functionality. So you're investing in the quality of the code. And that study I thought was brilliant because they'd actually got numbers on this. So this thing about measuring the value of refactoring, I think that then okay, we can start opening that up. Because it's like they found a way to measure code health. They've got their own proprietary way of measuring that with their tool, CodeScene. Are they sponsoring the channel now, I think?
I believe they are or were sponsors. So yes, shout out to CodeScene.
CodeScene, yeah. So kudos to them for actually finding a way to measure code quality in a kind of scientific way, I guess, and be able to actually show in the study that there is a relationship between the quality of the code and how long it takes to develop features and the variation. Like you said, it's not only that it's faster with a better quality code, but that you can actually predictably say how long it's going to take because people can actually understand the code and make reasonably good estimates.
I thought that was the most interesting thing about that study. Obviously, we want to be able to make changes faster and we want fewer bugs. But the predictability was really interesting to me because I never really thought about that. You just know that, if it's a code base that isn't high quality or hasn't been refactored properly, then it just takes a long time. But it's not long time that's the problem. It's the fact that you don't know if it's going to take a long time or not.
Well, yeah, they're both problems, I guess. So, I mean, that's, but it's also about quality of life. I mean, when we're talking about measuring the value of refactoring, for a developer, you're spending like most of your day in the code base, looking at the code and trying to understand the design. And if the design is poor and obtuse and overly complex, it affects your mood. I don't know, your satisfaction with your job. And if it gets too bad, you might be looking for a new job quite soon.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to mention. So the code quality thing is kind of interesting because if we refactor towards code quality and we can measure that code quality makes things better, that's obviously one value of refactoring. But I really wanted to touch on what you just touched on, which is one of the other values is it just doesn't feel so terrible to live in that code base. You don't dread opening certain files anymore, and you kind of want to make changes and you don't find it so dreadful to look for those bugs.
Yeah, you wanna have code that you feel that you can refactor safely. And some of that skill actually, as a software developer, it's a skill that you can learn. So if you're thinking about your code base and thinking, oh, I really don't want to go into that file and you know, that there's kind of hope. So that's kind of one of the things I do as a technical coach is train developers to use refactoring tools. So they can refactor safely and they can start to turn that situation around. Yeah. So measuring the value of refactoring. Get back to the question. It's good for individual developers to learn refactoring skills because you can make your life easier.
Yeah, you make your life easier. You are more likely to want to work on the code. You can make changes faster, and and there's a cost with low developer satisfaction as well because retention is poor and hiring developers is difficult. So all of those things come to different points of value. I wanted to ask a little bit about the thing you just touched on around refactoring as a skill, but also, using tools to do refactoring and things like that. So obviously my favorite refactoring tool is IntelliJ IDEA. And the reason I used to work for JetBrains is not I don't love IntelliJ IDEA because I used to work for JetBrains. I loved IntelliJ IDEA before I worked for JetBrains. And the refactoring tools to me were like magic because you tell it to extract a method or rename something and you don't have to do a find and replace and you don't have to recompile and find out where the compilation errors are. It should just work and you can have a lot of trust in those kinds of tools. I think tooling can really help us here, but refactoring, I don't know where I'm going to take this conversation. It could go in one of two ways. So for some of these smaller refactorings, tooling can really help us. But I think there's a potential for big refactorings where we can't necessarily automatically do that. And I'm assuming that's something that you do a bunch with your coaching, kind of look at how to do these sorts of things.
Yeah, so I agree. IntelliJ is a great tool and I like it too. But yeah, IntelliJ really helps you kind of with the nuts and bolts, the individual small refactorings of like individual methods and variables and at that kind of lowest level of the code, which is important. But the really big payoffs, I think, from refactoring come when you can restructure a module or a bunch of classes or introduce an entirely new layer in your architecture. But those larger scale refactorings come from a sequence of small safe of those other like tool supported refactorings. It doesn't. So that's one of the things I also help the people I'm coaching with is learning to plot a charter course from the design as they currently have it to the design as they want it through a sequence of small safe steps and becoming fluent with just making those transformations.
I think a really important point you just mentioned there is like, where do you want to take the design? I think sometimes, especially if we're using the automated tools, we don't even think that far ahead. We're like, oh, I could do this and I could change that. Having an idea of where we want to go and ideally the why, I think that helps tie into the story of like value. Am I doing this because it'll be easier to add new features? Am I doing it because I spend so much time in this code and it's difficult? Or am I doing it because it seems fun? I just want to add it, So would you agree that focusing on the why is really fundamental to getting your refactoring right?
Well, it is, yeah. Yeah. And that's again, the value of refactoring. You have to know why you're doing it. And it is fun. And it's tempting just to kind of, oh, I could improve this. And then 3 hours later, you're like, oh yeah, what was I supposed to do? But, you've got to keep in mind the feature you're trying to develop, really. And preparatory refactoring, making it, when you've got an idea, okay, I need to add this new feature, and I can imagine a design where adding that feature would be easy, and it's not the design I've got now. And so then you've got to work out, well, how am I going to get from here to that design where it would be easy to add that feature? So that's often a motivation for refactoring. It's I need to change the code, and the design doesn't support it.
Do you think there's, now I've got two questions I want to ask. Okay, no, I'm going to follow up on the thing that you just said. I read Kent Beck's Tidy First book. Kent Beck, another contributor to this channel. So I read Tidy First. I thought Tidy First was really good because it talks about refactorings, but also talks about tidies, which is almost like a pre-refactoring, even as small as putting in some white space and grouping your lines of code. I thought Tidy First was a good book for helping us think about, what do I want to achieve out of this refactoring? How far do I want to go? Do I want to do it before the piece of work? Like you said, like I need to refactor in order to make this code easier to change. Or are there some tidyings or refactorings that I really should put off until I have more information or until I have time, whatever that is? So I thought Tidy First had some really good insights into when to do refactoring.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read it.
No, I have read it, and I agree. It's Kent is so zen. He's like, yeah, it's very much like take it one step at a time. Do these really small things, like you say, just adding white space and or deleting dead code. A lot of the tidyings that he's got are really small changes, but they kind of add up, and that's the point. They add up and they're safe. Yeah, and his point, I guess, is about the trade-off that you're continually making. Is it, do I improve the design now, or do I put it off until I really need it?
I think that's what I really liked about that book. It sort of brought that concern front and center. Like, you have to think about these things. You can't just be making the changes just for the sake of it.
Right. It is also, I mean, the thing is, my experience of developers is that they're usually very motivated and very keen to develop new features because, you can see a future where the user is going to use this thing, and you're motivated to build something that they can use. Managers might, I guess, worry that developers are wasting their time refactoring and gold plating. But I don't think that's a big danger for most of the developers I encounter. Because they want to build something for users. I guess when it happens then is when there's a disconnect between the developers and the users, and they don't actually get to any feedback from real people using the software that they've built. And that's where you start to get tempted to just, it doesn't matter if I build this feature, I can just spend today refactoring. And that's, you want developers to be in touch with what the users need and to refactor in order to support that. So we're back on measuring the value of refactoring. That's the question here. And it's got to be in terms of, I'm refactoring in order to enable me to deliver more for my users and get more value from this software.
I think what's interesting about, I talk a lot about measurement because I talk a lot about developer productivity and how difficult it is to measure productivity. And I think refactoring can fall into this too. So if you're measuring productivity by, let's be ridiculous, lines of code written, then refactoring gets quite tricky, right? Because I would posit that a successful refactoring has negative lines of code. And so if you've got some of these traditional activity metrics, then refactoring might look like it's not adding value, when in actual fact, if the tests all pass, and maybe we'll talk about testing, if the tests all pass and you have fewer lines of code, that's successful, right?
Yeah, definitely. That in my book is success. And if your metrics are saying that that's not good, then change your metrics. Come on.
You need new metrics, yeah. So I did want to talk about testing a little bit because I think a lot of what we've been talking about assumes that you have ideally automated tests at various levels. At worst case, at least some manual testing, which ensures that your application still works the way it's supposed to work. I think no matter how good your tools are, and I do like IntelliJ's refactoring, and no matter how experienced you are as a developer doing bigger refactorings, I would feel very lacking in confidence doing a refactoring without some tests to tell me, no, it all still works the way it's supposed to work.
Well, it's about risk and judging the risk. So there are some refactorings that I feel confident to do without test support, and particularly the ones that have good tool support, that I know the tools are reliable and where I know that the IDEs can see all the code that would be affected by the change. I mean, you've got to judge the risk every time you do a refactoring, and there are refactorings that I think are such low risk that just the tool and the compiler is sufficient. But you're right. Having a test as a safety net is that source of feedback, fast tests that you can run. You'd like to have that. You would like to have that. But I wouldn't be so strict as to say I would never refactor without tests. I think there are some things I would do. You get to situations in the code where the design is so difficult to test that you have to do something in order to make it testable.
And you take a small risk to get the big payoff.
Yeah. And then you take the small risk, the relatively reliable tool-supported refactorings, get the interface or the whatever it is structure in place so that you can then write that test and then do the rest of the refactoring.
So I think we've only got a few minutes left, but I think it would be remiss of us to have this conversation if we didn't mention AI and refactoring. Do you have any experience of using AI to do refactoring for you or do it with AI?
Not a lot of personal experience because I know the deterministic tools so well. I haven't really felt. I mean, but I've heard that they're pretty unreliable, these tools at refactoring.
I'm playing with AI a bunch at the moment, just on small projects. So I don't have like enterprise level experience. But certainly for a lot of the refactorings that we're used to doing, the ones we've been talking about, like you said, determinism from your tool, knowing it will do the same thing every time. If you use the IDE, knowing it will do the same thing every time, knowing that your code will still compile, knowing that it's not going to break anything. That level of confidence is going to be difficult to. I don't want to replace that level of confidence with something where I'm not really sure what just happened here. Like, not only did you do this refactoring, but you may have rewritten my tests in a way that I did not approve of.
Yeah, so I'm pretty skeptical of them for refactoring. I think these Gen AI tools are quite good at, they generate new ideas. They'll give you ideas for where you could take the design, or ideas for how you could solve a particular problem. But I don't know. I would go back to my deterministic tools and actually make the design change. But maybe I'll learn to use them better, or the tools will improve. I don't know. I think there's a lot of scope actually now with getting AI tools to plan their own sequence of steps, and that they can, ideally, I'd like them to plan, okay, I need to do this refactoring, and then go and use the deterministic tool to do the refactoring and not try and just do it. Because they're only operating at the level of the text. And just the kind of the definition of refactoring is that you're manipulating the syntax tree. And if you're just working at the level of the text that's in the editor, you're not engaging with the structure of the code. So you can't be refactoring, actually.
Right, you're just sort of doing a fancy find and replace. Whereas if you use an IDE's tools, like you said, the syntax tree, it knows that this method is called by these places and it has to update those places.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea if you could use the AI with the deterministic tools at the right level. I have used AI to do bigger refactorings, like, again, this is on kind of demo apps. It did quite successfully remove a layer. I had a CRUD app and I had a service layer that wasn't doing anything. So it just kind of removed that and delegates straight down to repository. But even then, I was spending a lot of time eyeballing the tests to make sure it hadn't done anything weird and unexpected. What I have found AI really helpful for, though, is you can kind of set it off on a code base that you don't understand well, and it can say, you're using these patterns, or what I saw it do is, you're using this pattern in all of these places, and over here you're using this pattern, and you're like, ooh, I don't think we want that. So we can use AI, like you sort of suggested, we can use AI to tell us stuff about the code, which might suggest refactorings, or get it to look at some code and say, look, hey, this kind of smells weird to me. Like, what do you suggest? And then maybe work together with that to figure out a way forward. But sort of asking it to refactor my code so it's better, I suspect that's not going to work.
Well, yeah. It's not. It can generate some ideas, but maybe not do it reliably. Yeah, I don't know. These tools are changing really fast, and I'm glad you're getting some experience with them.
I did the video on AI for a few weeks ago, and literally the day I released that video, Claude Code came out with a new version, and then 3 days later there was a plugin for IntelliJ, and I'm like, I really wanted to put that in the video, but things like you say are moving so fast that it's impossible to keep up. And even when this video is released, there'll be like some much better AI tool that does everything that we said AI tools can't do.
Yeah. And maybe someone will say, oh, no, they're using the deterministic tools underneath now. And I'm like, well, yeah, got them.
Well, they are now because it's 3 weeks later. Okay, so I think it's quite a good idea to wrap this up and come to some conclusions. The original question is, can you measure the value of refactoring? And your answer is?
Probably.
It depends.
Well, yeah. To the extent you can measure the value of any development activities, I mean, yeah, clearly you can measure the value of having code rather than not having code, and well-designed code. Yeah.
And I think we can look at metrics like code quality, and we can look at things like, and it doesn't have to just be about code quality. It might be developer satisfaction. It might be developer surveys and things like that. So we don't have to be focused on lines of code. It depends on what we care about as an organization, right?
Okay, so maybe I want to re-record that and not say probably and say, yes, you can if you are prepared to take measures that are qualitative.
And meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So that was our one big question between Trisha and Emily. Can you measure the value of refactoring? And our answer is yes, probably.
Yes.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Trisha. It's been great talking with you.
It's been a good conversation. Thank you.